I really don't have any problem with it. I mean, it's how you look on it. It's mainly about Southern heritage.
I don't think it's necessarily a symbol of Southern heritage because, like I said, we lost the war, the American flag, which was the Union States. I mean, they won the war, so we fly that flag. And now, I mean, if you lost, why represent losing? It's kind of irrelevant. It doesn't make any sense to me.
It's both. So I can identify, yeah, it's part of what we've gone through, but at the same time, Nazi Germany, that was part of their heritage, yet the swastika is outlawed in Germany, therefore it's still, they understand it's disrespectful to honor that part of their past, and in the same, I feel that it should be said for us.
Back in the Civil War, yeah, it was the flag of a country. And the only reason people associate it with racism is because how the KKK ended up using it. So as long as you look past that and know your history, there's really no problem with the flag.
Everything changes over time. So, like, as of right now, this era is considered a hate symbol. So why put it on display knowing that even though you might have a certain reason behind it, that the reason behind it is going to be totally different when somebody else views it, because it's all about what somebody else sees from the outside, not what you believe yourself.
When it comes down to it, that was the goal of the Confederacy, was to keep slavery. Now, to keep someone down as subhuman and as a worker only, to have a reminder of that, around every corner, especially here in Mobile, it's disrespectful.
Well, I think that when groups like Dixie Outfitters or other groups say that the Civil War was fought over things such as state rights or the issue of tariffs, I mean, that is in part true. But it encompassed a lot more than just tariffs.
The slavery issue came late in the war. The French government and the British government were sympathetic to the South because they traded with the South.
One of the major issues was whether or not a state had the right to have slavery, and in terms of how to, what legal parameters with regard to slavery that would be under the state's purview, not any national infringement on that, etc.
And the South was going to have the support. And the North brought slavery into the issue. Well, England and France had both abolished slavery at that point. And rather than get into the controversy of slavery, they backed off supporting the South.
So, yes, while it is true that things like the tariff and states' rights and economic issues were part of it, that's not the whole story. Those economic issues revolved around slavery and enslavement of agricultural workers. Then you have other issues coming in terms of the social, political, and cultural issues that are tied in with slavery that also the Confederacy symbolizes.
Financially, the South could not say, okay, we're freeing all the slaves, because that was a great part of the plantation's value. So eventually it would have been phased out. But they brought it in and wanted to force it as an issue of the war. And that was the whole point of, it was fought over slavery, because the South, when they wrote their Constitution in 1861, they abolished the importation of slaves. There would have been no more slaves in the South.
I think in the beginning, again, based on the history, had a symbolism of pride, and the fact that you were from the South and this flag stood for what your beliefs were at that particular point in time. And I think for the slaves that were back during that particular time, it didn't mean that much to them, but for the people that had the power and the money, that's what it represented their status. Their Christian beliefs or whatever you want to tie into that. That's the symbolism of it.
The
Confederate flag is a soldier's flag. It was designed strictly as something to be used on the battlefield to guide the soldiers with. After the war, it kind of became the symbol of the South because there were so many Confederate veterans in the South at that time, and they formed Confederate veterans organizations. I belong to the Sons of Confederate Veterans. My 5 generations back, my family fought for the Confederacy. Okay? But before that, there was something called the United Confederate Veterans, and they were actually veterans of the war. And most of them, a lot of them had amputated legs and amputated arms and blind and everything else after the war. And when they met in their chapters and stuff, that battle flag was what they carried in battle. It was sacred to them, just like the American flag is sacred to the American soldier. It's no different.
So that is our flag. That is an honorable flag. That's a soldier's flag. That's all it was a soldier's flag. The Confederate flag actually did not represent the Confederate government. It represented the Confederate soldier. The Confederate government had 3 flags they used. They started out with the First National, they went to the Second National, and just before the war ended, they went to the Third National. So that flag, all it represents is the soldiers that fought in the field. And the soldiers did not fight for slavery. They fought for states' rights.
Now, moving into the modern period, the flag has always, the Confederate flag has been used by various groups, particularly since the 1950s. And I believe one of the first southern states to start flying the Confederate flag in the 1950s was Georgia. I believe that's what it was. But in any case, Confederate states began to fly the Confederate flag as a symbol of opposition to the struggle for black equality, the civil rights movement.
The battle flag has been stigmatized by people who used it in a way that it should have never been used, because the battle flag, as a matter of truth, was simply a flag that was used on the field so that the troops could determine where they were going. And it had nothing to do with all the things the connotations they try to put on it nowadays.
You began to see opposition emerging from the white community, and they often appropriated the Confederate flag, I believe the battle flag, the one that we're most familiar with in any case. They began to appropriate that as their symbol. So then, as in the Civil War itself, it was a symbol of hostility, opposition to the black struggle for equality.
Well, as some groups have misused the flag, basically not the flag's fault, but the groups that's misused it. You know, the argument that the flag represents slavery. Well, slavery existed more than 4 years in the South. Slavery has been in existence actually under the U.S. flag for 88 years. It existed under the Confederate flag for 4 years. If you're going to hate a flag because of slavery, which flag should you hate? I'm not advocating hating the U.S. flag. I'm just saying, 4 years against 88 years. We hate that the flag was misused by some groups. We have no control over that. The same groups use the U.S. flag. They have used the Christian flag. It's why would you single out one flag?
What groups are you referring to?
Well, basically the Klan. Mm-hmm. The Klan. They misuse the flag badly.
There was a guy named Jim Martin who was running against, running for the Senate, the U.S. Senate, against a senator, the sitting senator, who was a Democrat, named Lister Hill. By 1962, the Democrats nationally were being attacked within the South, were being attacked as the party that was pushing integration. So this candidate for office, Jim Martin, his followers created these clubs called Rebels for Martin. And of course, the symbol of Rebels for Martin was the Confederate flag. Well, what did Rebels for Barton want to do? They wanted to stop integration. That's what they wanted to do. So there's direct connection between hostility to African Americans and their aspirations and the Confederate flag.
History is being completely dumbed down in our schools now. I mean, they're not even teaching 1/3 of the history that I got taught when I went to school.
Okay.
I've looked at some of the textbooks, and it's horrible what they're. And I'm not just talking about Confederate history or Civil War history. I'm talking about even United States history, the Revolution, the Founding Fathers. All of that is being, in my opinion, purposely and purposefully deleted out of the history books and out of the curriculum. And I am very vehemently against that because a people who doesn't know where they came from is going to have a hard time knowing where they're going. And they're very easily controlled. And there was a famous quotation by a famous person, and I, at the moment, don't recall exactly who said that, but he said, if you can take their history away, you can control them, basically. I'm paraphrasing, but that's what he said. And I believe he might have been a Russian, I don't recall, but and that's what's happening here. And so what we do is we try to zero in on the real, true history as I learned it through reading the books of the people who wrote it and that actually lived it.
So we get past integration. I mean, we have integration now and so forth. Now the flag is still a symbol of opposition to something, and in this case, opposition to the government. Many of these radical anti-government, very very right-wing kinds of organizations will appropriate the flag as their symbol.
I think it's important that we show people how things really occurred during that era. A lot of times Hollywood has a bad reputation of misrepresenting the way the South is portrayed, the way the battles actually happen. And the main things we like to do out here is show people, it takes time to load one of these weapons. It's not one of these things where people just stand up and just shoot. That's Hollywood. But we try to make sure that people see the truth. We want them to know what really happened in that era, so that they can come out here, they can see it, they can experience it, they can smell the powder, they can feel the concussions of the cannon. They know what it's like now, and then they hopefully can pass it along to their kids that, hey, you see this on TV, that's not the way it happened. You know firsthand now what transpired during that era.
Part of the whole thing is the cultural question. What does it mean to be a Southerner? And I think that students who I talk to sometimes forget, quote unquote, that blacks are Southerners. The position is that just whites are Southerners, particularly when we're talking about the 19th century and the Confederacy. And just as when we think of colonial America, the default position is New England. Well, the South was extremely important in colonial America, and it wasn't just New England as the epicenter, but we have these default positions automatically of what constitutes a region, what constitutes 19th century America. And I think the thing is that part of the thing that I try to remind my students is that slavery is not just a Southern problem, it's a national problem. The entire United States benefited from slavery. There's not a single state that did not benefit from the enslavement of millions of black people.
Do you think that the flag is a symbol of Southern heritage, or do you think it's
Southern heritage. It is not hate. There's groups that have made it hate, but some groups that misused it as a hate symbol and made people fearful of it. And there's some groups that have used that to slander and degrade the flag, being the NAACP.
The Confederate flag is about heritage, it's not about hate. It's what was used during the Confederate. It's actually a battle flag. It's actually not even the flag of the Confederacy. It was a separate flag. The flag you see portrayed negatively in the press and in the media is the Confederate battle flag that was used on the battlefields. So that's one of the things, as part of the reenactments. Do you see the battle flag on the field? But the actual Confederate flag was a different flag. And it's what we try to teach people. It's about heritage. It's about people not forgetting the sacrifices those brave men and women did during that era so that we can have the great country we have today.
What they conveniently forget is, number one, not everyone in the South supported secession. So the Confederacy wasn't supported by many people in the South, perhaps the majority. We don't really know because we don't have opinion polls from 1860. But we know large numbers of people opposed the war. So for them, the Confederacy is not part of their heritage and their Southerners. And then, of course, African Americans, the Confederacy existed to keep them in slavery. So the Confederate flag doesn't represent their heritage and their Southerners. So that argument I've always found to be thin.
Heritage, no one group owns heritage. And in terms of U.S. history or Southern history, it is a mixing of groups that come from different ideological standpoints. Now, in terms of the flag itself, as I tell my students, a flag is a symbol that represents something. So the state flag represents the state of Alabama or the state of Massachusetts, and a country flag represents that country. So that Confederate flag, in all of its incarnations over the years, represents the country, the Confederate States of America, which was built economically, socially, politically, and legally on the enslavement of people with black skin. But on the other hand, the question is, well, there is always pluses and minuses to any history. Therefore, do we totally eliminate such symbols? And one could make the argument, well, what about the U.S. flag? I mean, that can represent imperialism, and that can represent racism and white supremacy and things like that. And, I mean, I personally am sometimes uncomfortable with the U.S. flag because of what it does represent. But I know that not everybody shares that viewpoint.
And the Sons of Confederate Veterans, my brother is in the Sons of Confederate Veterans, they strongly believe that this is representative of something they call Southern heritage. But like I said, I mean, the many people who never agreed with the Confederacy, their descendants are around, and certainly African Americans, and it's not their heritage. So not the Southern heritage in that, it's the Sons of Confederate Veterans heritage.
The SCV is a historical group. Our main purpose is to represent the Confederate soldier and defend their name. And sometimes it's hard to defend their name the way the attitude is nowadays. But that's what we're here for. The SCV was organized in the 1890s, and it was organized by Confederate veterans. It was the United Sons at that point. And they began in the late 20s and early 30s, they began to die out, and that's when they turned it into Sons of Confederate Veterans, so their descendants could honor them.
One year we had the entire Tuskegee Middle School here, 600 black kids. There wasn't a white face in them. And they had the biggest time, and they were the best, what's the word I'm looking for? Behaved. They were the best behaved group of, much more better behaved than the other schools. Very well behaved, and their teachers sat right down on them, make sure that they were good. They were good. It was a really good experience, and they enjoyed themselves, and we didn't have any problem with it at all. But their history should be just as important to them as ours is to us. And why zero in on one part? Political correctness, and we talk about diversity, and diversity is only a one-way street for the politically correct. If you're going to be diverse, let's be diverse with everybody. Let's just don't single out one group and just only be diverse for them. And that's where I have a problem at.
When it comes to the question of flying in on public buildings, well, of course not. I mean, we don't fly. The United States, the symbol of the United States, is a symbol of unity and citizenship and so forth. The Confederate flag's not. It's not that. It's very divisive in that regard. And we talked about this. If somebody wants to fly it in their yard or something like that, that's their business. That's a free speech kind of issue. But it's not a free speech issue when it's being put on a public building that represents all the people. So that's why public buildings have stopped flying it in the South.
When I see the flag today as a 62-year-old woman, I'm still frightened. I don't like it. And when I'm driving and I see someone with that flag on their car, in the back rear window, on the bumper, I stay away from it. Because I don't know if they're going to hurt me, I don't know what they're going to do, but I don't want to be anywhere near them because of what that flag stands for, for what it stood for during the time I was growing up. And so even though we're living in a different century, a different mindset, the way people are acting today, you just don't know how people are going to act out their anger. And people are angry today. And so anybody that has a flag like that, and I could be wrong by saying this, but I don't want to be around that symbol because of the history and what it stood for.
I think the point is that none of this history should be erased. And certainly removing a flag is not about erasure. But, again, the Nazi flag of the Third Reich does not fly in Germany as part of the series of German flags, to my knowledge. And I think that these are symbols of resistance. It wasn't until the 1990s that the state of Mississippi even formally adopted the 13th Amendment outlawing slavery to the Constitution. So, I think that these are issues that run extremely deep, and that there needs to be not just discussion about, but action on.
So do you think that the flag, or that a symbol could be repurposed in the opposite way, where originally it had a terrible meaning, but they just...
Well, I think in some cases, yes. I think an excellent example would be the pink triangle, which was used during World War II and Nazi Germany to note prisoners who were, they believed to be gay or homosexual. And they received a pink triangle. Jews would receive the Golden Star. So over the years, since the gay liberation movement started in '69, that the pink triangle, which was once a symbol of oppression, was reappropriated and used as a symbol of strength. And it's in the gay rights movement, the pink triangle has been, for years now, used as a symbol of power. But it was the oppressed group who took the symbol and reappropriated it to use it as their symbol, which is not what's happening with the Confederate flag.
According to Morris Dees, there's an increase in hate crimes, and he's done a lot of work with that, and people are acting out their frustrations, and they take it out on the least of those, or least of us, and they use whatever symbols they need to justify their reaction. And until we can get to the point where we look at everybody as equals, I think we're going to have these symbols that will divide us.
It's an American flag. That's the thing you can't get across to people, is that the battle flag is an American flag. It's not a Nazi flag. It's an American flag. And the principles that these people fought for under that flag are the principles that we are losing in this country right now, with the people like we've got in Washington voting in 2,000-page bills that they haven't even read. That's the problem.
So when we look at the use of it since 1950s, it's always been a symbol of hostility to the rights of certain groups of people, and something that has been used by people who are really marginal politically, and I think that people who feel threatened by well, things like having a black president, for example, they feel that their America is passing or something, very much like I suppose Southerners felt when they thought that Lincoln was going to abolish slavery. And this becomes this symbol of this anxiety, or something that represents opposition to change. It's very reactionary in that way.
So what are the principles that they fought for that you believe the Confederate flag stands for?
The Confederate flag doesn't really, the Confederate battle flag doesn't have anything to do with that. The first national flag, which if you go down around in the front of my house, you'll see a first national flag flying. That's the flag of the Confederate States, and that's the correct flag. There's three Confederate national flags actually, but anyway, that's the flag that represents what they were fighting for, and what they were fighting for was the constitutional provisions that were laid down by the founding fathers. And if we would have stayed with that, we wouldn't be in the mess we're in now. Our Constitution was shredded by Abraham Lincoln. He was a socialist. He was one of the worst presidents this country ever had. I'll go on camera any day of the week and say that. And it was a blessing that Booth put him out, but he should have put him out 2 or 3 years before he did, as far as I'm concerned. He was a railroad lawyer. And if you read the history of Abraham Lincoln, the real history of Abraham Lincoln, he was a tyrant. He incarcerated 30,000 Northerners because they dissented against what he was doing, with no habeas corpus, no formal charges, held them in jail, and a lot of them held them in jail until after the war was over with. And a lot of them were lawyers, doctors, even governors of states, because he didn't want those states to secede. He incarcerated the governor of Kentucky and Maryland to keep those states from seceding. He had no constitutional basis to do that. There was no constitutional basis for anything that he did. He usurped the power of the people that the Constitution gives to the people, not to the government. He was a usurper, just like some of the ones we've had in there recently.